we're at a crossroad in school food. Are we okay with serving Lunchables every day, or do we think our kids deserve better?
Yay Networks.
A quick note before we dive into today's podcast. If you like what you hear, I would love for you to subscribe to Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, wherever you download your podcast. It would also be incredible if you take a minute to rate and review this podcast. Those things do matter and they really help us. Y'all, when it comes to school food lunches, the nutrition guidelines, the USDA nutrition guidelines around school meals, there's a lot there. It is such a hot button issue. There's a lot of politics. There's a lot of policy. There's a lot of things that just really feel out of our control when it comes to what foods are being served to our kids. And just a couple of weeks ago, a friend of mine who's in this space, I'm going to introduce y'all to her in just a second. She shared on her social a little screenshot that Lunchables, essentially Lunchables, y'all, are now an approved food within the school food nutrition guidelines. So when we're looking at what are foods going to be served, and like we hope that as our kids are going to school, that they're receiving these nutritious lunches or snacks, breakfast, truly Lunchables could be in that number. So with that, to break it down for us, we're going to be talking about what's the deal with school food and nutrition policy. There's some proposed changes that we're going to be talking about that are currently under review and potentially could go into effect next school year. So we're going to break that down for y'all. And then just really talking about what is the status, what is the state of school food nutrition, what is opportunity for change, what can we do, as lay people or people who are involved in policy, what's the opportunity and what's the hope out there. So with that, I want to welcome Emily Chatelain. Emily has joined me on this podcast before, so I'll link to that. She is the founder of the School Food and Wellness Group. This is a national school nutrition consulting company, and they work with schools across the country to help truly integrate legitimately nutritious meals into schools. And we've worked with her before, we've worked with her group, and they're really passionate about scratch cooking as much as possible. How do we do this? But also, how do we help schools do this on a budget and be compliant within these guidelines? Emily is also the executive director of the 3 O'Clock Project. And this is a local nonprofit here in Louisiana. And the 3 O'Clock Project supports equity and access to healthy meals for kids. So she's got a lot going on in the school food and nutrition space. So with that, welcome, Emily.
Hey, Molly. Thanks so much for having me on. You know, I always love talking school food with you.
You're so passionate about this. Tell us a little bit about your background, because I think how you got into the space is really interesting for our listeners to hear.
So, it started, gosh, I guess back in 2012, a little over 10 years ago. I was working with schools and just, I always gravitate to the cafeteria, of course, to check out what kids are eating and what they're doing. And long story short, I kind of saw through the work I was doing that schools just need, a lot of help and guidance in managing their meal programs from like a budget standpoint and um, quality of food standpoint. So I just started getting involved with different school networks, charter schools mostly, and helped kind of go out to bid or turn around, the financial aspect of their program. And then of course that came with better quality food, redoing their procurement, et cetera. And just kind of found this niche of smaller schools that don't really have a big nutrition department. They don't have a dietitian or an accountant, et cetera. And that's kind of what we've built our business on.
You're underselling yourself a little bit, a lot, I'll say. But one of the things that I think is really, I love this story because you worked in a charter school, but not in the cafeteria space. You worked in more of the finance side.
Yep. So we kind of did all the back office support. So school food is one of the things that fell under our belt. I kind of managed all the contracts. So custodian, IT, security, food. And yeah, we, like I said, I'm pretty passionate about health and wellness in general. I had been doing races and kind of into, the health aspect and eating right and just like I said, started hanging out in the cafeteria and, um, just realized that there's so much more we could be doing for these kids who have a real need for good nutrition at school.
They were gonna pull it, right? The that particular school that year, I think, realized, well, wait, there was certain expenses that they had, and looking at it from a purely financial standpoint, you're like, wait a second, this is where like 90 something percent of our kids are getting this free or reduced lunch. And if we pull this, they're not gonna have access.
Yes, your memory is impeccable.
That's the part of them, like, to not even be in that space. You're more in that business office space, but then to see, okay, if this school needed help and they didn't know how to do it, how many other schools really could use that support?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, this school in particular was losing. It was like halfway through the year, and they're a pretty small school. They were about $30,000 in the red on their meal program, meaning they were spending way more than what they were getting in. And the principal at the time, was like, why are we even doing the National School Lunch Program, right? Kids can just bring their food. We don't have to do all this. And I just kind of was like, you don't get it. You don't see that these kids are like, they don't have a lunch to bring. And I mean, he really didn't get it. And so I kind of took it on as my personal mission
Mm.
to turn the program around and for him to say, hey, look, it's fine now, right? It's a break even, but it just made me dig and dig and dig further into this meal program and the way the reimbursement works and the nutrition works, and it just kind of launched this fire of we are failing kids around school lunch, and it shouldn't just be about the dollar, right? Like these kids really depend on it.
And right now, we mentioned a bit ago that the USDA has proposed changes to the school nutrition standards. Before we get into that, just for our listeners, what is the reimbursable, like, what is the reimbursement for a breakfast for schools who are part of the school lunch program or the school nutrition program, and also reimbursable for lunch? Does it vary, or is there a standard across all?
Yeah, so it varies right now. So here's the kicker is that right now the reimbursement is higher than it's ever been. And that is because of COVID, and USDA put an extra like 70 cents on reimbursement. We don't know what they're going to do next year, but we believe they're going to go back to pre COVID reimbursement levels. And that's going to average around $4 for a lunch and probably like $3 or so for a breakfast. Again, it's not, they don't normally, announce that until July for the coming year, but that's about what schools have to work for to pay for, the food, the packaging, the labor, all overhead.
So for every meal, breakfast or lunch that a child is taking, the school is reimbursed that amount.
Correct.
So when we're talking about kind of the national program around this, that's we're talking specifically in that space. The Tell us about the changes that are proposed to the school nutrition standards. And it sounds like when we talk about the changes nutritionally, a lot of these are really good things. Like, how would we not want to do these things? And we'll go into that in a second. But it sounds like there's some resistance from the folks who are kind of the school nutrition association, the people who are the very people responsible for this are resistant to the improvements nutritionally.
So let's take a walk right down history of the school lunch program in the US. The last time standards were updated or sort of put into place was going to be Michelle Obama's Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act of 2010. So, right, think about that. 2010, that's 13 years ago. Um, that's when they rolled out, right, whole grains and kids must take a fruit or vegetable and those types of things, which now, right, it's like, of course, kids nice, nutritious whole grains and fresh fruit and vegetables. But back then, when it was rolled out, there was an uproar, right? There always is whenever you have change of any level. So, given that, nothing has been updated or edited or changed since then. So we are past due by law. And don't quote me on this one, but I think that the White House is supposed to update these standards every 5 years. and they haven't. So it's been over, 2 times now that they should have. Anyways, they recently came out with a suggestion to all of the school meal standards, and I'll send you that link so people can look at the comparison, because it's important to see what's the current standard, what's the proposed standard. So, in a quick nutshell, some of the ones that I think are really awesome and a long time overdue. There are currently no standards in school lunches or breakfasts for added sugar.
So
You know,
no restrictions, no parameters, nothing that says what is that upper limit on added sugar that we can be including in the meals for our kids.
right? It's just not even looked at in purchasing or audits or nutrition analysis. It's just not something that has in the past been even, a rule around. Which is crazy, right? When you think about added sugars, we're not talking about just like natural sugars. This is specific to added sugars. When what we know now, right, about kids and what their, sugar limit should be in a day, and what we see in some of these packaged products that we so often find in school food, the packaged muffins and um, grab and go type items that were so prevalent during COVID, especially, right? When it's like we had to go away from kind of traditional scoop your meal onto a plate because of COVID. So, anyways, now they are putting in a proposed limit for grain-based desserts, breakfast cereals, yogurt, flavored milks, etc. Um, so that's one of the new standards.
Let's take a minute to share about Caraway Home, partner for this week's episode. Caraway Home's non toxic kitchenware collections make cooking and baking a piece of cake. We love our cookware. It's our go to for everything from seared salmon to creamy spinach to our Eat Fit candied cashews. The pans heat up quickly, they cook evenly, and they're incredibly easy to clean. And with our exclusive discount, you can now save on the full suite of Caraway products, including their internet famous non toxic cookware set, also Caraway's food storage, tea kettle, and mini cookware. Visit carawayhome.com/fueled to take advantage of this limited time offer for 10% off your next purchase. This deal is exclusive for our listeners, so visit carawayhome.com/fueled or use promo code fueled at checkout. Caraway, non toxic cookware made modern. So one of the things that I see of like why that's so relevant too, like you and I, as we've looked at things for, healthy school breakfast over the years, we would see that, companies get around it because they would have a muffin or something that would be like maybe not the brand Nutri-Grain bar or similar, but something like a cereal bar that yes, it may have a degree of whole grain in it that would, qualify it under the whole grain criteria, but not 100% whole grain, just basically some whole grain. So they would have that, but they might have literally a day's worth of added sugar in there. And so when we talk about like, typically we try to recommend like at max 20 grams a day of added sugar. Looking at like heart association guidelines and others, 20, 25 grams a day. And some of these may have 18, 19, 20 grams of added sugar in a muffin or something. Yet that still could slip in under those guidelines because, yeah, they have, a degree of whole grains in there and added sugar is not relevant. So that's it. To me, that's also a huge one to have in there as a recommendation or not even a recommendation, basically as kind of like guardrails for us.
Right. I mean, I was in a school one time just doing, an observation, and a teacher walked up to me. I think he was the PE coach, and he was like, "What can we do about the breakfast here?" Like, what do you mean? And he said, my girl goes here, and she's diabetic, and she can't eat breakfast here because every single product
Right.
is over her, like it would send her, spiraling. So you're right. I mean, even if it's whole grain, sugar is so important that it immediately can make that an unhealthy item. Um, and we're sitting here being told it's healthy.
What are some of the other proposed changes that really stand out to you? And Emily has already sent me the link of this. So I've pulled it up while she and I are talking. And I think y'all be really interested to see it. Sort of like it does, just like she said, it's, based on the different types of categories of, topics in nutrition, here's what we've currently got going on and here's what's proposed. So y'all be able to see it in more detail. But yeah, what are some of the other things that really jump out to you?
So a couple other ones. Milk is up for a new proposed standard. So currently, flavored milk is allowed for all grades K through 12. It does have to be fat free. The new proposed standard is saying um, allow it only for high schoolers. So, just taking flavored milk out of the options for K through 8.
Which can be
Um,
huge for like how we're essentially training kids' taste buds. Milk doesn't taste like milk, it tastes more like candy with flavored milk.
right. And that's always a complaint too. Flavored milk is a big hot topic in school. Like, schools either love it, right? Because they say, oh, it helps increase our participation because in order to get the milk, you have to get the lunch. But
Which goes
a
back to
lot.
that reimbursement we talked about. So when Emily's saying it
Mhm.
increases participation, translation, they get the money for that meal because the kids want to pick up that lunch because they're thinking they want the flavored milk. So to the school in those situations, taking flavored milk away from them, they're like, well, wait, then kids aren't going to want this entire meal if they don't get the flavored milk. And the schools are seeing that as a potential for hitting their pocketbook.
Yep. Yep. So another one. So you kind of know, right? The grains in school food right now, the requirement is that at least 80% of the weekly grains offered need to be whole grain rich. The rest can be enriched, flour. The new standard is saying to require all of the grains to meet that whole grain rich requirement. So just bumping that up to 100% of the grains need to be whole grain.
And we need to like
Um,
specify too, that does not mean these foods are 100% whole grain. Is it like 51% whole grain?
right? So the grain right now, 80% of the grains that you serve have to be whole grain, but only 51% of that grain needs to be whole grain, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So when y'all are looking, if you pull this up and you're looking, the guidelines say the way they say it is they don't call it whole grain. They say that 80% has to be whole grain rich. And what that means, if you dive a little deeper into that, is whole grain rich 51%. So already you're talking about grains that are just a smidge over half whole grain. The rest of that flour in there typically almost always is white processed. It's not always going to be, but usually companies are kind of getting right at that 51% mark and then keeping the rest white flour, a whole bunch of different reasons on that. And so, even with this, if we're saying the new proposed is to have all grains meet the whole grain rich requirement, that just is basically saying all grains now have to be at least 51% whole grain versus
Right, right.
some like that 20% that didn't have to be any at all. What's one more that really kind of jumps out
Yeah.
at you?
So the last one that's kind of around the food or the nutrition, the rest are around just like general rules and standards. But it's just the sodium, so the salt. Um, again, they have a current like kind of sodium target that they laid out, right? They would like to over time reduce the total amount of sodium served in a week. So the new one is just reducing the school breakfast and school lunch by 10% each year for, I think, 3 years coming. So, just a gradual rollout to reduce the amount of sodium. Now, if you recall, under President Trump, he kind of halted that plan in the moment, right? Because there was so much issue with supply chain, et cetera. So I think this is sort of just getting that back on track. So the big ones we talked about are going to be your sugar, the milk, for lower grades, the grains, and just salt kind of getting back on track.
And as we look at this, and I'm sure as someone who's listening to this podcast episode, if you're listening to this podcast anyway, you're likely wellness minded. And I think a lot of us would say, well, this all sounds great. Like, why haven't we talked about this before? Or why hasn't this already been put into effect? So, again, these changes haven't happened. These are the proposed changes. They're up for comment through the USDA, and there's actually like portals that the public can comment in here. So, it's open for comment. And if this is approved, it would go into effect next school year. So not the school year starting this coming fall. That would, of course, be a really fast turnaround, but the school year that starts in 2024. So while we think, wow, this sounds great, tell me about the resistance here because it seems like there's a lot.
So I'll try and look at this and be devil's advocate. The a big group that has come out against this is SNA, which is the School Nutrition Association, basically the network of all public school district school nutrition professionals in the U.S. So they came out and they said, and I'll quote, so I don't get it wrong: as schools nationwide contend with persistent supply chain, labor, and financial challenges, school meal programs are struggling to successfully maintain current standards, and they need support, not additional unrealistic requirements. So, school nutrition professionals, and that obviously doesn't speak for every single one, right? But they did come out as an organization with that statement, are saying we're struggling. We are already having a tough time finding food and that meets the current criteria, right? They're citing supply chain, their labor costs are high, all these other reasons why even in current day with the current standards they're struggling to meet. And I do think there's something to that. We've dealt with supply chain. We're all seeing it in our grocery stores, right? Costs have gone up. Now reimbursement went up, to try and combat that. So I think they're just a group of, 2 years they got beat up, right? We're on year three with a lot of struggles and just trying to serve kids food through all of this.
And we understand it, like, as you and I have looked at schools who are trying to pull together and they wanna serve good, nutritious foods, we've run into that, you and I together. Like, okay, if you're looking for things that match what the school can do or a convenience level the school needs or the price point that the school needs, all of these things, it is a challenge and it's possible. We have found foods that are possible. We do find distributors that carry these foods that can be, they are, compliant for the child nutrition guidelines. They are 100% whole grain, for example, instead of just the 51%. Or there are options out there, but it takes a lot of legwork, a lot of detective work to find it. And it's not the easy option. And it's not, there's certainly not kind of the high level first things that are going to be like the easy reach or easy change there. So while it's possible, we do understand that it's a challenge. And it's also a challenge because the food industry, they step up to whatever those expectations are and whatever is policy. And so we saw that, for example, back in the day before there was any knowledge about trans fats, for example, a lot of packaged foods companies used a ton of trans fats in cookies, bakery items that were packaged and they would last on our shelves forever. Well, when the USDA came out and included in the dietary guidelines to try to keep your trans fat as close to zero as possible, the food industry hears that, they start to reformulate it, and they're making products to now meet these criteria. And so the USDA, if we talk about again packaged foods we're seeing in our grocery store, you would notice if you looked at frozen dinners, for example, you would see that the sodium over the past decade is really a lot lower in a lot of these kind of like healthy choice or lean cuisine type things because they again they're listening. They see, wow, the USDA is recommending that people limit their sodium to X amount. And so they're reformulating their products to meet what this policy or these guidelines are from these governing organizations. So while you at home may not be aware so much of like what that USDA policy is as it relates to the nutrition guidelines for us as Americans in general or for school food nutrition, the food makers are highly aware. So when Emily and I were saying with that 51% whole grain, they have it exactly 51%. Like they know what that is. So these same food makers, in theory, if that were to, let's just say this is not one of the proposed guidelines, but let's just say it was 100% whole grain, you can bet that those food makers would say, okay, we got to figure out a way to do 100% whole grain, make it still taste good because we want to still be one of the brands that's being sold in that child nutrition space. So that policy matters. And so these proposed guidelines, if this were to get approved, that the sugar would have to be really monitored in these and there would be those limits and parameters on added sugar, we wouldn't be seeing that pseudo whole grain muffin with 20 grams of added sugar. They would have to go back and reformulate that. So while right now it's hard for the School Nutrition Association to maybe find products that meet that, raising the standards, my opinion on that is it raises the bar for these food makers to go back, reformulate, and come back and do better.
Exactly. I mean, right, we'll never move forward if there's not the painful time of that change period. And if I'm looking at, again, like you said, most of these companies have tailored their products to be NSLP friendly, right? And so
National School
take
Lunch Program.
right, take Bake Crafters, right? They're a national brand. They have a ton of baked products. They do a lot of school food. They've got like the French toast sticks, the pancake bites, the waffles. And up to now, right, or up till if this rule goes into place, they've just had to note how much sodium, how much, protein and grain are in that. They've never had to track the sugar. So why not? Let's push these big companies to start to look at that. That matters. We can't just be right pumping our kids up with sugar. But back to the school nutrition folks, the schools who are doing packaged items, breakfast, even in lunch, like buying right those pre-made items that are like a heat and serve, they're going to be the ones who struggle. Because yes, they will now have to find more products that fit. But like you said, these companies will adapt as well. But that's it's not all doom and gloom, right? It's the schools who are actually cooking food and controlling what's going into their recipes. They should be fine, right? You're just going to have to edit your standardized recipe and make it conform. That should be easy to do. And what we're seeing right now, to me, this is a very pivotal time for school food. USDA has come out and said, right, it's time. We want to make some change. Here are all of our proposed changes. But they're going one step further. They've come out with so much funds for schools who want the funds um, to help them, right, adapt to these changing times. There's federal grants right now that are coming out this year, 2023. There's one called like the Healthy Meal Incentive Grant for small or rural school food authorities, so districts, charter schools. And then there's another big one called the School Food System Transformation Challenge grants. Both of those are $150,000 or more per system to push you to have healthier meals, to do the things that everybody's saying is really hard and takes money and time. So it's exciting to see that, you know, the changes around us, you're either going to be with it or really struggle and fight against it. And I don't think that will go very well.
So we talked about both of the organizations that you have, one being the School Food Wellness Group that consults with schools across the country to you're working with them to develop their RFPs, their requests for proposals, to bring in the food service groups that are going to provide these meals. And so a lot of the food service groups that you work with, they do the scratch cooking. And so it is more that way so that there would be less of that pain point. The other organization that you founded and heavily involved with, executive director of, is the 3 O'Clock Project that we mentioned, and this is the nonprofit. And this is where you and I talked just briefly before we started this podcast. There's so much that is such a labor of love for you, and it's something that you put so much time into. And this is, a way to have that, to ensure that access to healthy foods for all kids. And this is something that is a local nonprofit. And I'll link to that too. So if y'all are interested, our listeners, you can click and see more on that. But it kind of goes back, like I call it like perpetual whack-a-mole, like until policy is in place, we're really kind of chasing and trying to catch up and make do with what we have. And so if y'all are, well, I guess let me ask this, at what level are you working to try to influence policy, and like what would it look like, or what will it look like, the things that you'll have on the horizon there?
So, I've always kind of said, I feel like I have this unique bird's eye perspective of both working in so many different states through our consulting group. We're in about 25 to 30 states, um, and also working locally here in Louisiana. So I'm seeing a lot of what other states are doing. And then I look back at Louisiana and we always feel like we're the last one, right? And whatever it is, we're somehow behind, or we never did it, or we're still struggling with it. And I really have reached a personal point of I'm tired of that. If I'm going to live here, right? If I'm going to raise my kids here, I really want to see change locally, statewide. Doesn't really matter. I'll take anything. So what 3 O'clock Project is doing right now is a lot more work on the advocacy policy side of this whole school food, healthy food industry. So we're doing a couple of exciting things. We are trying to right now work on policy and bring what's called the Good Food Purchasing Program. It's a policy that can be adopted by a city, or a school district. And again, right, I see the writing on the wall of where some of these more progressive cities are going with their food buying and the types of food. I'm excited about it, and I see no reason why Louisiana can't get there. But this policy in particular, it's a metric based, sort of flexible framework. It encourages large institutions to direct their buying power towards five core values. That's local economy, environmental sustainability, a valued workforce, animal welfare, and nutrition. And so what it does is it would, if an entity adopts it, so we're working on it right now with the school district here in Louisiana to pass this policy at a board level, but it would change the way that they procure the food for their meal program. And again, it's going to set them up for bigger grants to help them buy more local, spend more dollars on scratch cooking and chefs, etc. So it kind of sets the stage for that to be able to happen.
And this is called the Good Food Purchasing Policy.
Yep. And
Is that
it was
limited to just schools, or does that apply to other organizations outside of schools?
so it started in LA and Los Angeles Unified School District, LAUSD. It started there in 2012. It then the city of Los Angeles adopted it. It then went to San Francisco Unified School District, Oakland School District, Chicago Public Schools, the city of Chicago, Washington D.C. schools, Boston schools, Austin schools. So a lot of these, cities around have adopted it and been successful with it. So either or, right? If we fail at a district level, we can certainly go to a city and have them look into it and adopt it as well.
I'm thinking of like healthcare organizations. Like, could a hospital system adopt this, or is this specifically designed for schools? It sounds like but it's a great model.
Yeah, honestly, I think it's written for any large, institution. So
Yeah.
absolutely, a whole system, city jail system, right? I mean, any system that is buying and procuring foods, why not, push towards supporting your local economy, local farmers, better nutrition, et cetera.
And like we said about the other changes that are proposed, to the National Food Nutrition Program, School Nutrition Program, with this, with something like the Good Food Purchasing Policy, Emily is looking to incorporate this into policy, I believe, in East Baton Rouge Parish.
Yep.
And so, if approved, kind of like we were saying about the other, it helps, the distributors, because it's all about, let's say that you want to get a product that is, let's talk about like that muffin. And it's like, well, where do you get a whole grain muffin that's also low sugar and has these attributes that we want? Or where would you get locally sourced, fill in the blank as far as maybe like seafood or whatever that might be, or produce? when these policies are in place, so if and when East Baton Rouge Parish were to adopt this policy, the distributors who are bringing these products to the schools, and the schools are able to like reach out to, or other organizations reach out to these distributors, they're the ones that are kind of the network. Like you would say, who do you get your, pantry items from, or your seafood from, or whatever it is. When these policies are put into place, just like those food manufacturers, they have to up their game, and they're going to want to be stocking and able to offer these foods that are going to fulfill these new policies or these new obligations. So, what are some things? So something like the good food purchasing policy, where does that stand? Is it currently under consideration, or is it something that y'all will be bringing to the parish to consider?
So, in kind of exciting news, we've had a lot of meetings with the East Baton Rouge Parish School Nutrition Team. They are on board. At first, I think it was like a "What is this?" and "What is this going to mean?" and right, the big question of, "Well, how much will this cost?" But it's all about education. We took our time, we educated them, their team, around what does this really mean, and look, change doesn't happen overnight. It's something that will take 2, 3, 4, 5 years to really change the type of food you're purchasing, the type of meals you're putting in, uh, to then get your ultimate results. And I remember our last conversation, I kind of talked about how it is a struggle on the school food side of having outdated kitchen equipment and facilities. And, East Baton Rouge, if we keep talking about them, they don't have a central kitchen. So all of their food deliveries have to go directly to each school. They have 80 schools. So they have to find a vendor, a food distributor that has the ability to deliver to 80
Hmm.
schools, twice a week. So it's limiting, and they're dealing with old equipment, outdated equipment, kitchens that are just not even up to standard health code. Um, so again, it's going to take a lot of effort, a lot of money, a lot of folks who are open to change, to really change the way we think about school food.
What about parents? So, if parents are listening, or people who just really would love to help support this positive change, what are things that people listening right now could do that could help at least move the needle a bit?
Yeah, I think so. This is going up to the board, likely in their May board meeting. The board will vote on it and pass it or not. I think parents are the voice, right, of, or they should be, of a lot of things that are going on in your school. And again, in particular with East Baton Rouge, we've developed a kind of committee, right? This good food purchasing committee, because look, I don't have all of the knowledge and answers for a valued workforce and environmental sustainability. So we are leaning on others in our community that have that background in that industry to bring their voice forward and make sure that we do this and do it right. So I think from a parent's perspective, push your school. What are you doing? Have you heard of this policy? Or, oh, there's this grant, right, that's out there that's going to support local scratch cooking. And how can I use my talents, my network, my industry to support your work towards some of these goals? So I think it's just educating yourself about what is your local district or school doing, and how can you support them work towards some of these.
Also think parents verbalizing that it is important to them. We've tried to work with some schools just here in the New Orleans area, and some of them being private schools that have a lot more resources and a lot more ability to offer healthy options. Yet I'm thinking of one that's, right here in our neighborhood. The priest, who happens to also be over the food service, agreements, says, "You know what? That's not important to us." And I'm stunned because I know a lot of the parents whose kids go to this school, and I do truly believe it's very important to those parents of what their kids receive. Have they verbalized this to him? Have they really made a statement about this? It seems not, because he truly doesn't seem to think that this is important, and completely took it off the table from any conversation. And so it looks just very much like kind of the bleak picture we talked about earlier. So parents, like, speak up. Let your school administration know that this is a priority to you and team up, do it together, because if it's just one parent, they can be easily dismissed. Ugh, that person's such a squeaky wheel, or they're just obsessed with, like, they're obsessed about this, or, and sometimes, like, the narrative can become negative, especially if it's just that lone one or two really speaking their mind passionately. So unify and come together as a group and ask to meet with the school administration. Let them know it's important to y'all. Put it on their radar. And, y'all hear Emily's conversation too. Change takes time. It's not something that's going to be overnight, but as much as we can educate ourselves, verbalize to the folks in charge of those spaces that this is important to us, then as they have other opportunities put in front of them, at least the hope is they're going to give it more of a consideration than maybe they would otherwise. And as they're putting the RFPs out, the request for proposal for their next food service provider inside of their school, okay, well, maybe they do consider working with a company like Emily's, who can work with them to truly put quality food on the plates for kids and often still fit within the reimbursables, and all of these things, so that still can be a moneymaker and still giving the nutritional benefits to the kids that we're looking for.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head when you say you got to kind of organize, right? And there's more strength in numbers. Like New Orleans has a really cool group. I think it's right, like the New Orleans Food Action Policy Group, or I'll have to look that up. But there are groups that are out here doing some of this work and policy push and can support you and would probably be happy to join in on a meeting or a call or just help educate you on what they're doing. We've got the Louisiana Farm to School organization. We have LSU Ag Center, which, funds that and is behind that. We are a great state for a lot of the things that we want to get done. It's just a matter of organizing it
Mhm.
and putting all the right people together. So even if it's just a small group of parents who reach out and just have a meeting with your school nutrition person, right? And say, what are you struggling with? What is your current biggest hurdle? And how what would you need, right, to get more scratch cooked items in our school? Is it equipment? Is it labor? Is it money? Is it time? Is it, what is it? I think that that would be a really good step one of where do I start with how to help my school create change, and just knowing too, right, that like you said, you have to do it together, because they are, likely understaffed. They're likely underfunded. If the local priest, of that network district school doesn't think it's important, well, they're probably not putting any additional funds towards the meal program, right? And a lot of schools, unfortunately, look at it that way, that it should be a self sustaining line item, right? All of the reimbursement that's coming in should be able to cover our costs. A lot of times they don't. If you want a really good meal program with a fresh salad bar and locally purchased food that might be a little bit more expensive, it's going to take investment. So again, it's just better understanding, how your school approaches school food, and then offering your ear or your help.
Awesome. This has been really enlightening. I like that there's hope for some forward movement in some of these spaces. It's not just all doom and gloom. It is a giant uphill hurdle to navigate. I mean, there's a lot, and that change is going to be incredibly slow, but there at least is currently opportunity for change. So thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'm going to link to 3 o'clock Project and also School Food Wellness Group, the good food purchasing policy that you talked about, and then also kind of the side by side comparison of like current status of the school nutrition standards versus what's proposed. And I really appreciate your time, Emily. Thank you.
Yeah, it's always an absolute pleasure. Thank you, Molly.
Y'all can see why I adore having Emily on this podcast. She's such a wealth of knowledge. What we talked about today is just even a snapshot of the broad scope of the impact that she has in this space. She's truly who I turn to as a resource for so much in the school food nutrition. I mean, I trust her so much. I respect her opinion. She has so much education on what current policy is, what can't be done, what can be done, also what may not be easy to do, but it's possible to do. And she can really help to push these things through. So again, I just so grateful for her spending the time with us. I'll include the links that we talked about in the show notes of this episode. And always let me know what you think. If you've had experiences or ideas you think that could be beneficial in this space, definitely reach out. I am registered dietitian Molly Kimball, and you've been listening to Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, the podcast. If you'd like more Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, please head over to mollykimball.com, and you can follow me, Molly Kimball RD, on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And if you haven't yet, please go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Join us next week for another dose of Fueled Wellness and Nutrition. Thanks for listening, and stay focused on living your strongest, healthiest life.